In this panel, I've got three experts that we wanted to cover off a few things about Teams, and mainly driven by you guys, the service provider community. So, Cavell, we did a survey on behalf of the CCA last year and asked you what you thought the biggest competitive threat was, and the answer was Microsoft in terms of a vendor competitive threat. We did the same questions again in a survey this year in 2020, and that level of threat perception has increased. So the perceived level of Microsoft as a threat is increasing from a service provider perspective. So, guys, if we start with Paul Harrison, MD at Evolve IP, would you give yourself a brief introduction and explain what Evolve do?
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad everyone made it from lunch. So, Paul Harrison, MD of the Evolve IP. You may remember me from the Voice Factory. We got acquired in April 2018. We've been doing hosted UC since 2010 through an indirect model through partners, and those partners take our services to the market. We've been focused on verticals. That seems to be a good area to focus on for us over the years, and we've actually now become number one in hospitality and also in automotive, and we continue to look at new verticals to go into. I think the plan for Evolve IP, who buying the Voice Factory, was really to open up the market for them. They're a US company. They decided they want to be into Europe. They want to get into verticals, so it was a good match. Both companies were BroadSoft Cisco platforms. We own our own infrastructure, and we deliver services, I think, now in about 37 countries. So we're excited by the opportunity ahead, I suppose, in terms of what hosted UC gives us. I suppose we're interested now and see how Microsoft Teams plays into that.
Well, you've done some interesting stuff with Teams, and we'll come on to that. But we're also joined as well by Andrew from Ribbon, and key enablement partner, really, for Microsoft Teams.
Thank you. That's a bit of an introduction. But so I'm Andrew Vlodek. I'm the UK&I partner manager. What do we do as Ribbon? Well, we're a combination of a number of companies. You may know Genband. You may know Sonos. We merged a while back now. We've been a bit on the acquisition trail with buying other technologies complementary to the Microsoft and carrier spaces. In terms of where we sit with Microsoft, we're an enablement partner. We're a gold Microsoft partner. We provide carrier direct routing solutions. We provide enterprise on-prem solutions. We provide the prioritization team. So a full range of products, but we're not here to pitch that. We're about to talk about this threat. So I'll pass you over to Tom.
Yeah, and Tom, lastly, someone I've known and talked to about Microsoft, specifically Teams, for a couple of years now. So if you could just explain a bit about what you do at Modality and who Modality are.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks, Patrick. Yep. So hi, Tom Arbuthnot. I work for a company called Modality Systems, and we are 14 years in the Microsoft UC space. So through all the server products, OCS, Link, Skype for Business, and now the last few years is increasingly Microsoft Teams and Office 365. And customers from a few thousand seats up to the biggest one is about 250,000. So global customers, big rollouts, and kind of everything in between. And my personal role is split between some of our product stuff and strat for those customers.
So first of all, obviously we've got some interesting different perspectives on the Microsoft Teams proposition. Do you think, and I was talking about the survey results before about Microsoft being perceived as the biggest threat for cloud communication service providers, do you agree that that threat perception is accurate? Should Microsoft be perceived as a threat? And Paul, you can start.
Thanks. No, I don't. I know that's probably quite surprising. I think it's an opportunity, and the reason is, applications like Microsoft and also Cisco with their WebEx, collaboration tools are a part of our lives. I think we all use probably too many tools to collaborate day to day, and Microsoft have been around and they've tried certain different things, but I think Teams gives us a great opportunity. I think where we struggled, if it wasn't as simple as it is with Teams, if it was Skype and OCS, LCS, and whatever it was before that, I'm old enough to remember the various different versions, and obviously we're talking about the next thing here at the moment, and I'm sure there'll be another thing and another thing. But I see the opportunities there because what they've done, they've opened it up to allow carriers and service providers like us to actually complement Teams and actually bring the value. And what I mean by that is that we actually bring the dial tone into Teams. So, are you going to trust Microsoft to send your email and maybe put your customer details into a CRM and maybe collaborate and chat? Yes, but you're going to trust them for carrier grade telephony across different continents and deliver that in high quality definition? Probably not. Are you going to trust them as your porting partner? So I think we can bring that value to teams and complement teams in that perspective, and then that opens up the opportunity to say, use Teams as a collaborative tool, but use us as a dial tone and give us the carrier gradeness. If you rely on voice like we all do, and trust me, my phone rings if things go wrong. If voice goes down with the Microsoft Teams, it can be really hard to find that, that person who's going to actually be responsible for that voice. What we want to do is provide business continuity into Teams, allow people to collaborate, and then bring the functionality into Teams. You don't have to wait for the roadmaps of Microsoft or wait for third-party applications they may partner with. You can actually just deliver the whole solution day one today and complement with Teams, and that's what we're trying to do. So I think it's a great opportunity. And also, I know we're talking about Microsoft Teams here, but I just want to touch on WebEx Teams. And I think this is quite
really
important.
hijacked the panel there, going to WebEx Teams already.
I know.
I've saved that for my last question about Cisco WebEx Teams. Yeah, we'll come on to WebEx Teams in a little bit, if that's all right. So, in terms of, obviously, Ribbon, you work with loads of service providers. What do you see in terms of the opportunity threat analysis?
So you asked the question, is it a threat and opportunity? It's both, really. And I think there's a lot of misconception from the carriers, because at one stage Microsoft was a threat. They were taking the lines of minutes with their calling plans, etc. So originally there was this the threat piece. That hasn't kind of panned out for Microsoft now. They want to engage with the carriers. They see the carriers as a very easy route to market for the enablement piece. They want to start working with them, and they start to building those relationships. So, that threat piece has always stayed there. In terms of the opportunity is huge. And certainly when we look at the carriers and how the models are changing, so we're seeing diminishing revenues around SIP, we're seeing the counts going down, because obviously the opportunity around federation in Microsoft is driving those counts down. So a lot of the carriers that we work with, particularly around Teams, are now charging out per user as opposed to per session. So it now starts to say to them, well, actually, on the ratios of deployment, where I used to be 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 30 to 1, I'm now in 300 to 1 if I'm going into a Teams environment, but because I'm charging a user, I'm actually getting 300 times more margin, because I've got 300 more opportunities to charge. So that's a real key point. So there's a big opportunity there. The reach as well, and one thing particularly is that, with any UCaaS solution, we're not just talking about Teams today. We are a vendor of CPaaS solutions ourselves, CPaaS, UCaaS, etc. But in terms of the marketplace, owning the edge from a carrier is a key thing, and particularly in Microsoft, because if you own that edge, you suddenly have a sticky customer. Your customer will have no loyalty to Microsoft. If that's all you're providing on a carrier direct routing, he will look at maybe something like RingCentral, 3CX, etc. However, own the edge by putting an SPC on the edge, giving that security, giving them the survivability, giving them the option to prioritize the application into the cloud. You now own that customer. So the opportunities are great from a carrier perspective. Giving those solutions, and again, like I say, Microsoft are open today, as Tom will verify, to talking with carriers. They see them as a really, really big opportunity.
And Tom, you obviously come from a Microsoft, more ICT specialist in terms of communication and collaboration, rather than the cloud communication space. How do you perceive that threat for traditional cloud communication service providers?
Yeah, I think, is it a threat? Depends on what you're doing as a business, and obviously there are different businesses in the room. As Andrew said, I think at one point Microsoft made this big statement that they were going to be a first-party PSTN minutes carrier, and they were going to cover all the countries. And you can see they haven't overtly said they're backing off of that, but it's been well over a year since the last country was Canada. There's only 11 countries. That's clearly not at the forefront, and they are engaging with carriers to provide the minutes. So if you're selling minutes, you could sell minutes for Teams in the same way as you'd sell generic SIP for other platforms. But I think in terms of coming after your customers, if you're a small SME PBX vendor, the Office 365 stack is quite compelling. So if you're not engaging with the opportunity to work with Teams, there is a good chance on a timeline, and I think it's a fairly long timeline in the SME space because things move slower. It will become obvious that if I use Teams for my meetings and I can flick a switch and turn on voice, then I might well do that for some or all of my seats. The opportunity side of it is if you get on the Teams bandwagon, that expands you into potentially the whole Office 365 stack, which is a wealth of opportunity in terms of training and services, but very different to what might be done in a traditional carrier or telco space.
Yeah, so there's a change of model potentially there in a couple of areas. But in terms of the integration that you've done with Teams, you probably highlighted that there are shortcomings within the Teams as a PBX replacement at the moment, and that's probably an understatement, isn't it? That there are shortcomings. It probably won't replace a like-for-like system.
Yeah, the integration we've done is really just to try to complement Teams. Like you said, if you treat Teams as a PBX, we're effectively, most carriers here, and Andrew is doing the same, we're SIP trunking effectively to that PBX, replacing the ISDN lines and using Teams as a PBX. But what we're doing with Teams, we're using it as a PBX just for some basic functionality. So, calling, Teams to call, messaging, things like that. But when it comes to more complex things, I want to do a three-way call and integrate into a CRM. I want to do call recording. I want to do a call center. And then, we bring those value added into Teams. So you don't have to leave Teams to collaborate and work and send messages and document share and everything else. But also you can still stay in Teams to actually do those communication methods. I think that's where we're coming from. So it's really, that integration is just to really complement it. And I think what we're doing if we do it from a SBC point of view, which we do in the US, and it's a good play, we struggle to really bring those Class 5 features into Teams. We've actually done it from a different perspective, where we're actually bringing the Class 5, BroadSoft or Cisco, as it is now, has 500 features. I'd love to sell them all, but we'll be all day. But I think if we can actually enable those features into Teams, the key features for that business, I think that's key. And I think, being here the last few years, we were probably using 4 features each 2 years ago. We're probably using 5 or 6 features now. And next year we're using 7 or 8 features. So we're developing as a workspace, and our requirements are developing. And to rely on Teams to bring that PBX functionality into it to meet the business needs today, I think is a risky move. And we're going to complement that and make sure it's available today, and then allow Teams to do what it's good at, and that's to collaborate.
So we're seeing quite a lot of that, and certainly in the marketplace, you've got an incumbent estate there. It's mixed. It could be Mitel, it could be a lot of ShoreTel hanging about, it could be a Avaya, and then suddenly they say, I want to go to Teams. There's a misconception that everyone's just going to rip and replace to move to Teams. No, because they want to keep that hybrid telephony. And this is effectively what we call it. You can keep that incumbent estate and migrate at your pace. A lot of the stuff we're starting to see, and we're working with some other UCaaS vendors around using that feature-rich telephony in the cloud, but also adding the benefit, the collaboration and collaborative working of Teams and combining the two together. So, again, there is another opportunity, certainly in that hybrid place. And we're seeing a lot of that today, and Tom's deploying quite a few of those, aren't you?
Yeah, the feature thing is interesting. We were doing this when we were deploying Link and Skype. It's like we've got an Avaya with a trillion features, and it's like, well, how many do you use? And you go through it, and they're not using that many. And Skype server had way more features than Teams has now, still even today. But we are seeing, certainly in our customers, and they're all Microsoft customers because that's what we do, so maybe it's a biased view of the world, it's more about single client, simple experience, and less about those features. So we always talk about Teams as a collab platform that can also do telephony. If someone comes to us and says, we're doing an Avaya PBX replacement and we don't care about collab and we don't care about online meetings, I'm honestly like, well, Teams is probably not for you, because you're going to be like, I want the telephone to have this button and do this thing and that thing. That's not Teams. But if you want the collaboration and the online meeting experience and you need some telephony, then Teams is a perfect fit. So as always, it comes down to business requirements. I think Andrew's point is good. You can have some people running on Teams as telephony because they're mainly knowledge workers, like they make a couple of calls, but they're mostly doing meetings. But you might have some hardcore phone users that need those traditional features, and it's fine. They can stay on a traditional phone system and still use Teams for meetings, still use Teams for collab, or maybe, as Paul said, the interop is an option as well.
In terms of, I just wanted to pick up one thing there. Microsoft are developing a lot of, and we used to talk about it a lot previously, in terms of features and functionality of the phone capability. Surely, as that improves and it does catch up with the traditional PBX requirements that businesses might, that increases the threat from Microsoft as the phone system capability increases. Would you?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Microsoft will get there and they'll catch up. I mean, they've partnered with all the major carriers around the world. They've learned a lot and they're using that knowledge. I think the thing with Microsoft is that if you're an MSP and you're selling Microsoft today and you're selling Microsoft fully for the voice side of things, you're going to be controlled, your margins are going to be controlled by Microsoft, your features will be controlled by Microsoft, and also you're going to be waiting on roadmap items. And I think the carrier-grade telephony requirements of businesses out there today, that's going to be hard for Microsoft to meet. They might have the functionality, but then delivering it behind a strong SLA to actually deliver that to the customer is where us service providers have to live and breathe and die by delivering that quality service. And I think, and if you're in a pure Microsoft play, and going to Tom's point, if you're a guy in a warehouse or a meeting room versus a person that's out on the road all the time who may be a very big Microsoft user, you don't need all the Microsoft licenses. I don't need the E3 and E5 license if I'm in a warehouse. I just need dial tone. I just need to make a call, and I need that sort of flexibility of that hybrid model. And I think carriers like us we can empower the Microsoft Teams users for all the voice features they want, but also we can enable all the meeting rooms, the guys that don't need the full features of the Microsoft licenses. And what you get then is a predictability of cost. You actually get a license that's actually fit for purpose and fit for that user, rather than everybody paying £35, £40 a month for a license, and most of those features not being used. And I think it's an education. We need to get that across. We need to understand how businesses really want to adopt that. But it's not going to be for everyone. You're not going to have a 100-seat enterprise with 100-seat users on E5 licenses.
No. Andrew, what do you see as the deployment options, the models out there for sort of adoption of Teams for cloud communication service providers?
Okay, so there's a number really. I mean, the first thing is we've got to understand that our attitudes to all of this and the way that we use telephony today have changed massively. And they are changing, the concept of cloud, we've talked about it for years, here it is, and it's kind of happening. We've got all the major large vendors moving into that marketplace. In terms of how we would deploy, obviously we have a carrier direct routing model. The carrier can provide the service. We have an enterprise model, which basically means that you can sit the SBCs on-prem, run it in a private cloud, public cloud. You can connect up the SBCs into CPaaS type solutions, other cloud solutions effectively, so that there are different ways to get into Teams. The real point, and where Microsoft look at it, is obviously they're all about consuming those team licenses. Whether it's from a phone point of view, they're compensated on different pieces. So, your licensing in terms of your collaboration, your chat, etc. And that's all passed down on license agreements. And this is where the carriers in particular can benefit, all the partners effectively, because it's a great partner play. In terms of where we're seeing an uptake, I mean, I'll just give you an example of a carrier that I was talking to just yesterday. Started on his carrier direct routing, put an SBC into his core, went out to market. In 3 months, he's now got 176,000 registered users in 3 months. That's an accelerated uptake. And I asked him, I said, are all these just Teams users? He said, no, a lot of these are hybrid, etc. using, but his projected growth in 2020 is 1.5 million. And that's phenomenal figures. That's great. But he's really insistent on saying, actually, it's not all about Teams. You can keep your existing estate. You can keep whatever you've got in terms of cloud usage. But really where he saw the value was the value adds turning on, the analytics that he can upsell, the SD-WAN type features he can upsell to this by the prioritization into Teams. The rationalization of the bandwidth, etc. So all of these were value adds. And he says, actually, that's great. They're my users. But where I'm going to make money tomorrow is the rest of it. So that's really key where we see.
Yeah, I think I would echo that's so important. I think direct routing is going to be table stakes. Like all the big telcos are going to offer direct routing. Like we're part of a group, GCI, who offer direct routing. Like most people are going to have an existing carrier relationship, and they're going to turn up and go, sure, you can move your minutes and your numbers to our direct routing. So as businesses, you're not going to make your gold there. That's where you need to add on other services. So in our world, that's managed services around Teams, it's collaboration, it's training, it's security, it's adoption, it's those pieces of the puzzle where we add value. And if you are primarily a telco PBX business and you're coming into Teams, I wouldn't think that you're just going to sell minutes and maintain the margins or the opportunity. It's going to be what are the other opportunities around Office 365, maybe being a CSP, maybe doing other pieces of the puzzle, WAN, SD, all those kind of things. That's where you would make new margin, new opportunities.
In terms of something that we were discussing before we started this panel, and I have just had a look at Teams in terms of a research report, I think it's probably a proposition that you can't really afford to ignore because of its potential within the market. 20 million daily active users in Teams, and we can define daily active users if you want to go there. But also the potential within Office 365. So obviously, Paul, you've realised this, and it's a massive opportunity generally, even though, as you said, there's potentially a slight shift in model, maybe quite a big shift in model to really take advantage of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a massive opportunity. I mean, marketing, you probably, if anyone looks at Evolve IP or seen us on LinkedIn, it's all about voice of Teams, it's all about Teams collaboration. And I think that's really the focus. I mean, you know, we're a Cisco powered platform, so Teams and in general, that collaboration is key. And we, as a provider, we need to be agnostic as well. You know, this sole proprietary route of clients that do collaboration and video, and then trying to work that into Teams is just not going to work. People aren't going to want to change the UI if they've got Teams included in their 365 pack and they're starting to use it. And as they start to use it and get to know it and like it, you know, we need to just sit completely transparently to that and complement it and not change that interface. And then we can just add that value into Teams, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're using Teams, but they're not realizing all the plumbing behind that and all the applications behind that to allow that to work as a business is actually provided by us in terms of the collaboration. And I think that's the strength. You know, in the old days with Skype and everything, yeah, we could plug into Skype, but, you know, you've got to use this screen. We've got this pop-up will come up. Oh, I don't really want to do that. I just want to use the same UI. And, you know, I remember getting shouted at quite a lot in presentations where I said, well, you know, you get used to it. You know, they won't. And so now it's just really making sure that Teams is actually working seamlessly. And then behind the scenes, you know, you've got a carrier grade telephony solution behind you. And if you want to turn on a feature, you're not going to go to the Microsoft website and say, oh, yeah, that's coming in October. I'll wait for that. You want it now. You want to enable that now and not delay on your business. And I think, you know, if you think about how we collaborate internally as a business, but it's how we collaborate with other companies as well, you know, and I think Teams gives us that opportunity where, you know, we're working with our colleagues in the US, we're all on Teams. And
the federation point is a key.
It is key.
Aspect.
And I think federation, it makes life a bit easier and we can all be joined up and work together.
And Andrew, from Ribbon, obviously you see it from a global perspective as well. I assume it's just gone through the roof in terms of Teams growth and...
It has, and obviously the roller coaster that's Microsoft with all its innovations that came out, OCS, then Link and Skype, you know, it was great. But I think Teams is definitely the largest growth I've seen in the last 6 months. It's just skyrocketed, and yeah, you know, a lot of the people are saying, well, actually, I've got to get on Teams from companies you would never imagine would have even looked at that, and hence the attitudes are changing. But certainly, you know, the federation is a key point, and this is something as service providers I think is really key, because the minute these guys are starting to federate, you know, that session count consumption is going to go down. So again, going back to that model where a lot of the guys are changing slightly and charging per user. As opposed to per session, they're maintaining their margins and revenue. That's effectively it. But the federation is a key point.
And Tom, fastest growing Microsoft business application of all time. When we were talking about its potential within Office 365, we were talking before, and Office 365 is 230 million daily active users in a couple of months.
The numbers of Teams itself are pretty interesting. So we're just coming up to 3 years GA. I think it's the 14th of March. So the 20 million daily active users is super impressive, and that's not licensed. That is touching the product on average every day. That number is obviously heavily still collaboration and meetings. That is not 20 million daily active telephony users yet. But the Office 365 numbers, as you say, I think it's 200 million monthly active users on Office 365. Mate, it's going projected upwards from there. So it's not even 10% of the Office 365 base that are using Teams daily yet. And we know from the Link and OCS days, the trajectory here tends to be you win what was instant messaging, it's now collab, you win that piece, people get comfortable, then they do online meetings, and then they do voice once they sort of nail online meetings. They're like, well, if it's our meetings platform and meetings are important, then surely it could be our telephony platform too. So even though we're 3 years in and it's the fastest growing app by seat count for Microsoft ever, we're still at the beginning of the journey. I think you touched on something that's really interesting, is the change in attitude. So our customers, the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of seat customers, I've been at Modality for 10 years, that the projects 5-7 years ago,
Thanks, Siri.
That's a little bit scary. The project
wasn't Cortana.
The project tended to be, how are you going to make Skype for Business 5.9? How are you going to match all these Cisco features? It's completely flipped now. The big enterprises are completely sold on Microsoft 365, and that's Microsoft doing a lot of work to sell them on cloud, but also Cisco is all about cloud, Google is all about cloud. Like, cloud is the thing to do anyway, so they're all sold on cloud. A lot of our customers, because they're Microsoft houses, are sold on Microsoft. So Teams is sort of a default conclusion. It's why not Teams, not why Teams. Like, Teams is happening, it's just what's the timeline.
And a good point there really is, I mean, we went out to market because it's, you know, a great point to understand your market and where your arena to sell to. We did a survey amongst that, and some really interesting facts which we can share with anyone who really wants to pick that up with us, is that where is those adopted? Who are the early adopters? Where is it going? And certainly the large enterprises are well on the way. Those SMEs up to about 250 users are really just starting that journey today. So the opportunity is huge. The enterprises are well on their way, and the journey into Teams. But if you look at the base of it, and they're asked the questions, when will you look at this? So again, in that 250 market space, when will you look at it? In the next 2 years. So again, the time is now to be getting into this because it's huge.
We were talking, Tom mentioned some of the competitors before, and you mentioned Cisco in your first answer, and Cisco WebEx Teams. I was interested, and I had this down on my list, that's why I wanted to save it for now, is that you see the proposition from both a Microsoft and a Cisco perspective. So, and I'd be interested for all your opinions on this. Why isn't Cisco perceived as the same level of threat? Is it because they don't control the productivity app market? What do you think?
I think Cisco is a threat, but not to us, because we're a Cisco platform. I think it's interesting. I mean, we talk about the 20 million users on Teams, you know, and WebEx Teams has got 30 million users, so WebEx itself. So Cisco, they both call themselves Teams, don't know why, but anyway, it's confusing the market. But Cisco and WebEx Teams, I think, are key for the collaboration. And what Cisco are doing is actually quite different. They're actually going to work with Microsoft and Microsoft Teams and allow that collaboration into Microsoft Teams, which is quite unique. Not sure what's probably coming from the other side, but I think that's good. So for us sitting here in the middle and saying, yeah, we can, if you've got WebEx Teams, we can actually integrate with that and voice enable that and allow you to do that collaboration within that environment you know and love and you're developing. If you're in Microsoft Teams, the same thing. But if you're a Microsoft Teams house and your customer is using WebEx Teams, guess what? We can allow you to federate and actually connect together and actually collaborate between two different. So now we're tearing down those boundaries of those proprietary walls. I mean, trust me, I used to work for Nortel. Proprietary was the first word we used to say in every meeting, was a good word, you know, and but not now. I think, you know, we need to open things up. We need to sort of and do that. And I think the WebEx Teams and the Microsoft Teams are going to win the day. We could sit here and argue it's going to be 75% Microsoft Teams, 25%.
Can we? I'd love to.
Yeah, 25% WebEx Teams, who knows, right? But at the end of the day,
I think Slack would probably want to have a go in there, and Google as well, potentially, although they haven't really got into the space with Hangouts Chat. There's all of those mega cloud, and that was the sort of point of this panel. I realise we're sort of coming to time here, so unless there was any critical points, have we got any questions from the audience? David, yes, please.
Right. For those smaller partners who are traditional voice partners, and Tom said there that there's no gold in Teams alone with the third-party voice aspect, how are they going to skill up to provide the whole of the pie to really get the most out of this?
So that question was for smaller providers how are they going to effectively upskill their workforce to take the most of the wraparound services from Teams that you're going to have to enable to really add the value? I think it's going to be difficult from my perspective. So
we're seeing a lot of partners. There's a big shift in the landscape of the partner base at the moment, and you know we're starting to see some partners becoming managed services, other partners just going to services. But then you know you've got the smaller partner who's the traditional telephone supply. You might be doing Mitel today and selling a few here and there, and wants to get into Teams. Well, you know, as a vendor, we'll take him on that journey. We'll help him. We can introduce him into specific areas, specific other overseeing partners that will help him implement, and then get him into a point where he's successfully on that journey. It's not a case of, I'm going to put my foot in the water, I need to skill up on training and never sell anything. There's a staged approach that we can help partners with, and certainly, the likes of Modality, I know they work with other partners already, they help them on that piece. So.
Yeah, I'd say it's going to be tough. My recommendation would be is partner first and check you have a model where you have customers that want to engage with that, your sales force can sell that, because there's no point hiring a bunch of Microsoft skill and having them on the bench, and it'll be spotty when you first start because you'll be doing your existing stuff and a little bit of Microsoft. So my recommendation would be to potentially partner first, and kind of to your point as well, there'll be a whole bunch of Microsoft shops that didn't really do voice that can now pick up direct routing or resell direct routing white labeled from anybody really quickly. So the competitive threat for the telco provider is actually the person who's already selling them Office 365 going, hey, for £2 a month I can put your phone numbers on Teams, do you want to do this? So that's the thing to watch, is actually if you're not in the 365 story at some point, I would almost guarantee whoever's selling 365 or Microsoft will get slicker at their marketing message about providing the phone numbers. It's going to come in from that way. So an immediate thing would be if you can find a partner similar to you in terms of size and scale, you can at least start that story and feel out where your customers are.
Bertrand, I thought you had a question as well.
You did not talk a lot about mobile. What would be your views on how mobile carriers will behave with reference to Microsoft? And sometimes lack of convergence or the mobile-first experience? Any comment on that?
Well, they worked really hard on the mobile-first experience with Teams, haven't they? But in terms of...
I think it's super interesting that hasn't been more of a thing. I mean, if you look at who got certified on the last round of gateways for Teams, it was lots of the gateways that are used in the carrier space and in the mobile space. So I wouldn't see it being miles away from like having kind of single number services from some of those mobile providers that could do cell or mobile and Teams potentially. I'm also starting to see a shift in some of our enterprise customers about, do I even need a landline soft phone, quote unquote? Like all I do every day is schedule a bunch of meetings and jump on the meetings. I'd maybe dial into them occasionally, but mostly VoIP, mostly video. So do you really need the landline, or could you just be mobile first? So I think it's an interesting space to watch.
Yeah, definitely growth place, definitely.
I had one sort of final one. In terms of we've seen, there's a high-profile TV advertising campaign for Microsoft Teams at the moment. They're really pushing. This isn't going away, and I think that's the key thing. Whatever your strategy is going to be around Microsoft, the sort of conclusion I've come to of looking at it is you just can't ignore it, regardless. Whether if you're going to compete with it, but have some sort of strategy. Would you echo that? This isn't really going anywhere, is it?
So I think it's quite interesting in terms of how aggressive they are. So they're offering out specialist bundles into education, into frontline workers, etc. So in education you can pick up your licensing for nothing. If you're a college, then you get 3/4 of the price discounted, etc. So they are really, really aggressive in terms of world dominance. I guess that's where they're kind of heading. But I think just picking up back, on threat-wise, historically Microsoft were always concerned about Cisco. It was always Microsoft, Cisco, and we certainly saw this from a partner play. Today, that attitude has changed in Microsoft. Their real concerns is not Cisco, it's the like of Google, Amazon, etc. That's where they perceive their threat. So there's been a big mind shift, and if we're putting that into today's market, it means that us as consumers are accepting more into these cloud variants. And that's the real key. Everything's sat there in the cloud. Now, how do we address that with other options? And the key really is where Teams is pushing that forward.